Welcome back to the I Am Passionate podcast. It's your host, Jaren Smith, and I hope you all are doing well. We are about 24 hours from the NFL draft, and I thought I would give, my takes on who I think will go from 1 to 32 in the draft. But, kind of talking a little bit how I covered last year's draft. Essentially, last year, I only really covered what I thought the top 10 picks would be, and then I also had covered what I thought the Ravens pick would be. And last year, I kind of had a little bit more of a wishful thinking approach. And I'm going to try to be more realistic, think of, team needs for each position, and, kind of just talk about each team a little bit to the best that I can. But before kind of talking about the draft, I figured I should talk about the Ravens specifically in the offseason because the last time that I talked about the Ravens, John Harbaugh was the Ravens head coach, and now John Harbaugh's in New York. So for any of you who haven't had the chance to ask me how I feel about it, don't get me wrong, John Harbaugh is the current best head coach in Ravens history, and I get it. They've had a very, very short history. They came in, I believe, 1995. But he is their current best head coach, in their history. But I do enjoy the move of getting Jesse Minter, the former Chargers defensive coordinator. And a little fun fact for those of you who might not know, Jesse Minter was on the Ravens staff from, I believe, 2017 to 2020. Then I believe he was involved in Michigan with Jim Harbaugh for a little bit. So he kind of had a very similar career path to Mike McDonald, the current Seattle Seahawks head coach. Uh, and I kind of wanted a defensive-minded head coach for the Ravens, which I know in today's NFL, most of the head coaches are offensive-minded. The reason why I wanted a defensive-minded head coach is I feel like, the past couple of years, with the exception of 2023, I feel like the defense has been kind of the Ravens' Achilles heel to an extent. Not just the defense as a whole, the Ravens, the last 5 years have definitely shot themselves in the foot. But the last 2 years specifically, this past season, season before, yeah, the Ravens defense, you can't start basically the first half of the season basically being the worst defense and then, second half of the season, you basically become one of the better defenses. You need to be consistent from week one till, for the whole entire season. And I think the Ravens are going to get that. The Chargers, the last few years under Jesse Minter, they've had a great defense. And I think that, he's going to bring some of that philosophy from, the Chargers, into Baltimore. And also, with having a defensive-minded head coach, it was really important to, get a good offensive coordinator, which I think the Ravens did, through, I believe he was the Bears passing game coordinator. I'm sure Kevin will type it in the comments. Declan Doyle, which I believe great hire. Sean Payton basically had said himself that he doesn't think the Ravens are going to be able to retain him for very long. So that's a good sign, technically. To talk about Max Crosby's situation a little bit, it was interesting. Like, don't get me wrong, when I saw it, I was like, oh Lord, we got one of the best pass rushers in the league. But then, ended up falling through, which it ended up working out because the Ravens were able to sign Trey Hendrickson. Nnamdi Medbike is looking like he is going to return, in which he made a huge difference in the Ravens pass rush. 2024, his last full season play, the Ravens as a whole had 52 sacks, which I think was fourth in the NFL. And the last season, the Ravens had 30. That's a huge drop off. Huge. And I think, just with Trey Hendrickson and Nnamdi Medbike, people like Trey Jones, who I believe, not Trey Jones, Travis Jones, I'm sorry, led the Ravens with five. And then, Mike Green, I think he only had like a handful, like three, but he had a lot of pressures. So I think, the Ravens pass rush is definitely to be looking a lot better. So now we're going to go into the first round predictions. Um, I kind of, I did a lot of research for this. Like I've been looking, looking at different mock drafts, seeing, different analysts' reasons for why they think, oh, this team's gonna draft this kind of player, or this team might do a trade. So I will admit there is going to be one, I guess we'll say, hiccup to this list. And that is, certain teams have, like the 13th pick, and then they'll have like the 27th pick, just from, some of the trades that have happened. And so I'm just kind of doing this to the best way that I can. And, essentially what I had did is, looking at Peter Schrager. He's a great analyst in the last several years. He basically had predicted the Super Bowl. Looked at there was one other. ESPN analyst that I had looked at. But essentially, I looked at several of their mock drafts and, kind of saw their format, and I tried to do the same. So if it looks like there's a team missing, which I don't think there is, but it is because, like Peter Schrager and the other analysts, essentially they included trades in theirs, which I only really have one team pulling off a trade, but I tried to make sure that I have every first round pick, in order to the best of my knowledge. Here we go. First round overall pick, the Raiders. This one's easy. Fernando Mendoza, Indiana's quarterback. Yes, the Raiders did sign Kirk Cousins. I don't think Kirk Cousins is going to be the Raiders quarterback for very long. I would not be surprised if maybe Kirk Cousins, plays a few games, but the moment Kirk Cousins starts to slip up, it's going to be Fernando Mendoza. But typically, as a first round, first overall pick, Fernando Mendoza is likely going to start. Is I can't really think of very many first overall picks that were quarterbacks that did not play day one. I think, yeah, they're going to pick Mendoza. They're going to try to get their quarterback for the future. And the Raiders, they have some weapons. They have Ashton Genty. They have Brock Bowers. I think they're going to get their quarterback for the future. And then they're going to try to, add, receivers, through the draft or through free agency. Second, this one is going to be a curveball. I think I have the Jets taking Ohio State's Caleb Downs, which I know he has been linked to the Giants a lot. But the Jets did not have a single interception last year. Not a single one. They added Mika Fitzpatrick, which he I think had one interception last year, and I do, I've noticed that some, like between Peter Schrager and the other analysts, one had Arvell, Arvell Arvell Reese, sorry. And then the other had David Bailey from Texas Tech, which I could see them kind of going either direction, but I think they're going to try to address their secondary more, especially because Aaron Glenn was a corner in his playing days. So I think he definitely does not want to go 2 years in a row without a single interception. So for my third pick, I have Arizona taking Notre Dame's running back Jeremiah Love. I could see Arizona trying to trade down and, add more value, but I think they're going to go running back here with this pick because, they're rolling with Jacoby Brissett, who did play really well for Arizona last year. And what I think that they're going to end up doing is I think they're going to try to, kind of have that run game established and, try to make Jacoby Brissett's life a little bit easier, whether it be through, having a consistent run game or, just even having that check down threat. So for pick four, I've got the Titans taking linebacker Sonny Styles, I believe also from Ohio State. Um, the Titans, they have a lot of needs across their entire roster, but here was kind of my thinking when it came to this. The Titans' new head coach is Robert Saleh. He was the 49ers defensive coordinator last year, and he did a great job considering that the 49ers basically had the most injuries in the entire NFL and had basically a bunch of rookies, second and third stringers basically playing, starting, getting a lot of PT or just making a huge impact. But under Robert Saleh, even when he was the Jets, head coach, Robert Saleh coached teams always have good linebackers. And I think that, with Sonny Styles, who I believe also had an amazing, combine and pro day, Sonny Styles could be a cornerstone for the Titans defense just to, kind of get that early stages of, the Mike Vrabel Tennessee defense that, basically had, top defenses for those few years. So for five, I have, the Giants taking the edge Arvell Reese. Uh, the Giants don't necessarily need him exactly, but I think they're going to try to replace Dexter Lawrence to some capacity. It makes me wonder how long Kayvon Thibodeau is going to be on the team, especially if they go edge rusher here. But I think they're going to try to take, like the best player on the board in this moment. And, he is somebody who some, ESPN analysts or just analysts in general, Arvell Reese is somebody that some people think will go sit with the second pick. Moving on to the Browns, I think they're gonna go tackle. I think they're gonna go with, I believe he went to Alabama, Caden Proctor, and he's huge. He's like six, like I was about to make. I caught myself. I caught myself. I ain't gonna. He's a big dude. Um, Their defense is already very good, and last year they had a great draft, and people were judging them, like the day of the draft. And I think this year they need to get an offensive lineman, and I think they need to get a receiver. And I think they start by getting Caden Proctor to shore up, their offensive line. Because no matter who we see at quarterback, whether it's Deshaun Watson, whether it's um Shador, whether it's Dylan Gabriel, the Browns need their offensive line back because it's going to help whoever plays quarterback and it's going to help their run game, obviously. So for seven, I've got the edge rusher David Bailey, which he's also been in a lot of top fives, for mock drafts, but I don't think his potential, like, I don't think he's gonna slide due to like any particular reason other than I would not be surprised if we saw a few surprising picks. And by surprising picks, I mean I wouldn't be surprised if we see, teams in front of the Commanders maybe go a direction that you don't think they're, going in because teams send out smoke screens all the time. So I don't think, David Bailey's going to slide due to like any other concerns other than just people are like teams are being very surprising. Um, Number eight, I have the Saints taking wide receiver Carnell Tate out of Ohio State, which is funny because I almost had the Commanders taking Carnell Tate, which like I kind of was at a toss up, which I think that, Tyler Shuck, Saints quarterback, not basically, he played amazing in the second half of the season. He played amazing with the time that, he was given. And so now I think the goal for the Saints should just be to get some weapons, for him, because basically what, a formula that these teams do nowadays is that, you have a young quarterback, we surround him with weapons, then we give him the big money. So if the Saints think Tyler Shuck is the real deal, they need to get, some wide receivers. Moving on to the Chiefs, I think they're gonna take the DB, I think from LSU, Mansour Delone. I'm not Delone, Delane, I'm sorry. When you see me kind of looking over, just looking at my notes. Um, Essentially, the reason why I think they're gonna go corner here is because the Chiefs traded Trent McDuffie to the Rams. And I've had a conversation with my brother. The Chiefs don't pay corners. This goes back to Marcus Peters. They didn't pay him. And now, they didn't pay Trent McDuffie. Um, Not saying that like they did not want to pay Trent McDuffie, but I never thought Trent McDuffie was going to get traded. I never did. But hey, now that we're in a world where Trent McDuffie's on the Rams, I think the Chiefs are going to try to get, their new cornerback one. And the thing is, the Chiefs scheme on defense, like their secondary aren't necessarily a bunch of strong, crazy players, but the thing is, they all have great technique, and their scheme, in my opinion, doesn't ask them to do a crazy a lot. And plus, the Chiefs have a good front seven, so that makes the, secondary's life even easier. Moving on to number 10, the Giants, pick, which originally was the Bengals. I think they're going to go wide receiver for this pick. I think they're going to try to, stack weapons around quarterback Jackson Dart. And I think they're going to take, wide receiver Jordan Tyson. In the offseason, they added Ravens tight end Isaiah Likely. And, not like, they're going to add, Tyson and then they're going to have Malik Neighbors. And so I think they're going to try to, basically be able to apply the pressure to teams just in their division, let alone the entire conference. Because the Eagles defense, they're going to be fine. The Cowboys defense is going to look to improve. And so I think they're going to try to build an offense that can compete with the best of them. So that's the first 10 picks. Let me know what you think about, my predictions so far. Let me know where you agree in the comments down below. Let me know where you disagree. Um, I think, out of all of the 10 picks I said so far, if I had to say which one is maybe a reach or just not likely, I'd say my Commanders prediction. And to be honest, maybe even the Arizona prediction. I think the other ones, I think that might be a direction they might go in, but they might not pick the specific player. And like my goal for this isn't to, you know, get every prediction right for the first round exactly. My goal is, in all honesty, just addressing, what, positions these teams need and see if they go in that direction. That is what I'm going to take away from this. So moving on to pick number 11, I believe Miami needs a tackle on offense. I think they're going to go with Francis Maugoa. I'm just going to call him Francis just so I don't butcher the name too much. Um, I think he's going to slide a little bit only because it's been reported that he has a herniated disc in his back. And so I think that, from, looking at college tape and everything, I think that he's somebody who definitely is a first round talent. I just think that, especially like with a back injury, I think that kind of scares away some teams and that, you might fall, a handful of picks. But it's important, to kind of get, that tackle because Miami's going in a new direction. They hired former Packers defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley, I believe is his full name. And, they basically they're starting over. And, they have Malik Willis at quarterback, and you need somebody to protect Malik Willis. And this guy, yeah, he could fit the bill. He could fit the bill. And yeah, we'll only wait and see. Next, we have the Cowboys, who I think it would be a Jerry Jones move to take an edge rusher here. And I think they're going to get the dude from Miami, Ruben Bain Jr., who had a very productive year for the Hurricanes last year. And the Cowboys as a whole, they finished in the middle of the pack, with, sacks on the defensive side. And yeah, I think it's just the Jerry Jones move to pick an edge rusher the year after you basically make the move to trade Micah Parsons, which Micah Parsons got a payday. So like, even though that I think I would have paid Micah Parsons if I was in charge, I understand, trying to go for someone younger who has a lot of potential. And hey, having Quinnen Williams and then having, this potential rookie, Bain Jr., hey, that could be, your stars in the defensive line. Moving on to the 13th pick, which is the Rams. It was originally the Falcons pick. I think they're going to go in a direction that you would not expect, myself included, because I don't even think they need this player. I think they're going to take USC's Makai Lemon. I think like they're like Stafford won MVP. Puka Nacua at one point last year was like on pace for like 2,000 yards. Devontae Adams had a boatload of touchdowns. I don't think they need another wide receiver, but I think they're in such a win now mode because Stafford. I think at most Stafford will play 2 years, not because of lack of talent, because Stafford's amazing. He's an amazing quarterback. I think he's going to retire within the next 2 years, just as a factor of age and how his body may feel, depending on, how like the seasons go. And I think Lemon would make, their offense an even more difficult, unit to stop because you're going to have multiple people to have to look out for, which that's a scary sight. Now, 14. This is where the Ravens pick. In the mock drafts, between both the analysts I looked at, they were addressing the offensive line. I do not know how to say the person's name who the ESPN analysts were predicting, but I did agree with their reasoning, which is, the Ravens lost Tyler Linderbaum, and the person that, they are predicting the Ravens are going to draft, he's supposedly a really good run blocker. But I am going with, tight end Kenyon Sadiq, I believe from Oregon. I originally, like, if you would have said like a month ago, I would not have predicted the Ravens to draft a tight end. Now, obviously, they lost Isaiah Likely and they lost Charlie Kohler. So the Ravens are kind of in the market for another tight end. Most teams typically have two tight ends. Like, they're going to have at least three. You're going to have a blocking tight end. You're going to have your receiving threat tight end, and then maybe kind of one that's a combination of both a good receiver and a good blocker. And I think they can use another receiving threat. I don't think they're going to draft a wide receiver because, Rashad Bateman and Zay Flowers, they both are kind of making starter wide receiver money. They're not making no Jamar Chase money, but, they're making some good money. And I think the Ravens, I think they can stand to use, another tight end here, which the Ravens are great at drafting tight ends in their history. Like they had Todd Heap, they have, I think, not even I think, the Mark Andrews, which I understand the last few years, Mark Andrews has had his fair share of criticism, but Mark Andrews is the Ravens' all-time leading wide receiver. And Isaiah Likely, who showed a lot of flashes, just unfortunately the Ravens never were able to utilize him as the true number one tight end that he basically is. And yeah, we'll kind of see what they do. I would not be mad if they went offensive line because I think the Ravens do need an offensive lineman. I think they need offensive lineman, and I think they need at least one more pass catcher. Now, for the Bucks, because we're 15, I'm trying not to speed through this. I'm trying to, kind of look at my notes a little bit and kind of, talk and kind of give my overall opinion. This pick, like specifically this player, it might be a reach, but the idea of it, I don't think is. I think the Bucks are going to take Georgia's linebacker CJ Allen. The reason why I think that they're going to try to take him is because Levante David retired. They could use another middle linebacker, and CJ Allen could be somebody that the Bucks could pick up, let's just say in the third round, or maybe even in the second round. They could pick him up at a different time. But I think if CJ Allen is on their board, like I think they should address their needs on the defensive side, even if it's not him exactly, even if it's another linebacker, because offensively, um, which I would not be surprised if they went to receiver because Mike Evans is no longer a Buccaneer and the number one wide receiver is now going to be Ekbuka. They still have Chris Godwin. They have Cade Otton. So, like, they still have some receivers. I would not be surprised if they had addressed the receiver only because Chris Godwin the last few years has had, some injury issues. But I think they're going to try to shore up their defense. And, this wide receiver class, a lot of good wide receivers. Hi, Nala. But I think they're gonna try to shore up that defense a little bit, try to get that heart and soul, there, and then just kind of continue building. So next, another huge reach. But I'm only saying this because I think the Jets are going to take the wrong player. I think the Jets are going to take Alabama's QB, Ty Simpson. Yes, they have Geno Smith back on their roster, but I don't think Geno Smith is, a part of their long-term future. Geno Smith is 35 years old. He just led the league in interception thrown with 17. I think that Geno Smith, he should be their starter. And like, whoever, sits behind him, they sit for a while. But I think it's going to be Ty Simpson because I think they're going to want to grab their potential QB of the future now and then like let them develop, let him learn, and then let him play. I think the only way Ty Simpson would even touch the field for the Jets is if Geno Smith gets hurt, which, hey, the last few quarterbacks the Jets have drafted did not really work out for them. So I hope with if they take a quarterback, because I feel like they're gonna take a quarterback. I hope, I hope they let Ty Simpson sit because if they start whoever quarterback they draft, but in this instance, if they start Ty Simpson day one, they're just gonna be repeating the cycle. They're gonna repeat the cycle they had with Sam Darnold. They're gonna repeat the cycle they had with Zach Wilson, even though they only had Justin Fields for a year, they're going to repeat that cycle, which you can say that Justin Fields is not the true part of the Jets QB cycle. But regardless, I think if they want to have a quarterback for the future, they've got to let him sit. Like he has to. I think that's a team, which I understand. QBs that need teams that need a quarterback, they take them, which I understand. But some of these teams they draft a quarterback, hold on to him for 2, 3 years, and then they move on from him. I think if the Jets are truly tired of that cycle, they need to let their future quarterback sit on the bench for at least a season. Moving on to the Lions, I think they're going to take tackle Spencer Fano. The Lions, they recently released Taylor Decker, and I think they're going to want to shear up, their offensive line, in which, for a team like the Lions, making sure you have that offensive line solid, that's huge because you have Jared Goff, who's a pocket passer. Like if you're like, let's just say if your right tackle wasn't as good as your left tackle, don't get me wrong, it's still a problem. But if you were a mobile quarterback, there are some ways to kind of counteract that. But with Jared Goff, you're not going to expect him to, outrun Myles Garrett, for example. So I think shoring up that offensive line is going to be huge just to see, kind of how the team, continues to build things. Moving on to pick 18, I think the Vikings are going to take safety Dylan Theinman. I think they're going to go safety just because, the last few years with Brian Flores, safety has been a huge part of their scheme, their defense. The Vikings blitz a lot, they disguise things a lot. And Harrison Smith, he might only have a year or two left in the NFL. And I think, the Vikings might have the approach of let's take his successor while we can. And if Harrison Smith is still on the team, just the perfect, mentor relationship right there. Moving on, I have my first trade. I believe the Texans are going to move up because I think they were originally picked like 28. I think they're going to move up to trade with the Panthers. Then I think the Texans are going to take tackle Blake Miller. The reason why I say this is Blake Miller already in college, he played a lot. He started, all 4 years. He played all 4 years. And the thing is, which me, my brother, and Kevin, we kind of talked about this. Pretty much every person who gets a new contract, basically they're getting paid, the highest contract in history that's not a quarterback. Will Anderson of the Texans, he got his huge payday. And, we all kind of joked that, CJ Stroud's going to be running for his life because they're not paying offensive line. Yeah, they need to build that offensive line because the Texans are basically going to be the same team year in out if they don't build their offensive line. We all saw that Patriots and Texans playoff game. The Texans were in that game despite how bad CJ Stroud played. And the other thing is he played as bad as he did because the offensive line could not block anyone on the Patriots. They could not. And so I think if they really want to take advantage of, all of the great players they have on defense, they need to build that offensive line. Because if you build that offensive, if the Texans have an offensive line, I think that's going to be scary hours for the NFL. Because then at that point, CJ Stroud will truly have no excuses. Truly. Moving on to pick 20, um, which I believe also goes to the Chiefs. We're gonna go with wide receiver Omar Cooper Jr., which I don't think the Chiefs need a receiver exactly, but I think that if the Chiefs have the opportunity to draft him, they will because he's a very versatile player, and he has some comparisons to Debo Samuel in regards to his versatility. Moving on to the Steelers. I think they're going to draft, the Georgia tackle Monroe Feeling. I think, Aaron Rodgers, I think he's going to come back. And the thing with the Steelers last year is that Aaron Rodgers let go of the ball quick, which I mean that is a patented, Aaron Rodgers technique. But I think that, the offense could look a little different this year in that, I mean, maybe Aaron Rodgers holding on to the ball a tick longer just to take some more deep shots. And I think having, a tackle, to secure, the edge rushers, like I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it. So moving on to pick 22, Chargers, Jamad McCoy, which I think he's a very talented, DB. And I know he has some concerns with the NFL because last year he had torn his ACL. But I think the Chargers could use, to kind of bring up their secondary. I also think they could go edge rusher here because they did lose Odafe Owe to the Commanders. So I could see them going corner, or I could also see them going edge rusher here. Moving on to the Eagles. I agreed with the ESPN analysts here. I'm gonna go with tackle Max. I'm gonna call him Max. His last name starts with an I. I have no idea how to pronounce it, in all honesty for you. Uh Ianachor? Oh yeah, I'm just gonna call him Max. But I think this would be a pick for the future because Lane Johnson, who knows how much time he's gonna play left in the NFL, and this could be a pick where it's gonna leave some fans scratching their heads for like today because they do have a roster to compete and win the Super Bowl pretty much year in and year out. But when I think of the Eagles, I always pretty much think of them having a decent offensive line, and I think this is a pick that it may not show it this year, but a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, with this pick, if it turns out right, Eagles fans will be happy that they drafted him. Now, part two. Moving on to pick 24, the Cleveland Browns. This is another reach, but I have them taking Zachariah Branch from Georgia. I think they need to address the wide receiver room because the Browns wide receivers did not play all that well last year, but at the same time, they were definitely impacted by the quarterback play. But I think they're going to take Branch because he's a very versatile player. He also does special teams. He can, return punts, and he's a big play threat. I think he can be somebody that can, give the Browns a spark when needed, whether it's through their special teams, whether it's through, taking, a short 5 yard route, 30 yards, which, other, picks, which, I could see them going. I can see them going with a bigger wide receiver, like Denzel Boston, if he's still on the board. Um, but I think they're gonna go for kind of somebody that give them just that little bit of juice, and like, I mean, I guess in a way that this pick reminds me of like Zay Flowers, exactly, where like size wise it's not gonna intimidate you, but hey, they're smaller and faster, twitchy guys. That's kind of what I think about it. Bears. Now, this specific player might be a reach because This specific player is projected to go within the top 15. I have the Bears taking edge rusher Akeem Mesidor, which a lot of people had going, as basically within the top 15 picks. But the reason I think that he will slide is only because I think teams are going to pass on him because he's a 25-year-old rookie. And I think teams are gonna, pass up on that and, try to go for, the edge rushers that are 22, 23 years old. The Bears, they desperately, in my opinion, yes, desperately need to get another pass rusher to go alongside Montez Sweat. Montez Sweat is a great player. I think me personally, I always just wanted the Bears to get another edge rusher alongside of him. I think Montez Sweat is better as a 1B kind of pass rusher, like a second pass rusher, like somebody who would take advantage of being like one on one all the time. Now I get it. In the short term future, with whatever edge rusher they draft, it's going to be their draft pick that takes advantage of the one on ones, and teams are probably going to try to double team Montez Sweat just to make the rookie beat us. And I think that, there were times last year where the Bears pass rush was they were not getting after the quarterback, but they would come alive when they're needed most, which that is also huge. I think the Bears are gonna go pass rusher here. I think they really need one. I think they could if they could add one to two, I think that'll be great for them. Now, next for the Bills, this is another one I also agreed with from ESPN analysts. I think they're gonna take defensive tackle Peter Woods. Originally, before the Bears traded Bills DJ Moore, I would have expected the Bills to go after a wide receiver, but because they now have DJ Moore, I think they're going to address their defense because the Bills' run defense last year was buns. They were ranked 30th. Yes, they were ranked 30th. Sometimes I'm not going to lie to you. I get surprised when, teams, like for example, when the Ravens were playing the Bills like in week one last year, I thought, the Bills were not going to be able to stop Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry. But even though that game was a shootout, they did just enough to win. But, the entire season last year, the storyline was all the Bills don't have a run defense. The Bills don't have a run defense. Ed Oliver and Matt Milano did miss some time. They are both huge, for the in the run game for the Bills. And I think having this pick just kind of gets, what they would need to have the depth, have the pieces to be able to defend the run. They've always been pretty decent in, defending against the pass, which I'm not sure if that's going to stay this year because Sean McDermott is no longer the head coach. So I'm really interested to see if, their defense kind of takes a hit in that regard or if they're just going to be like the same kind of team. Moving on to the 49ers, I have them taking Caleb Lomu, which my thing with that is I am I think with the 49ers, yes, they just re-signed Trent Williams, which, that is huge. But the thing is, Trent Williams, I think he's got a season or two left. Not because of talent, but just because, I mean, I don't know how many offensive linemen that I can think of in history that would have played as long as he's played, like age-wise. Like like the physical demands of being an offensive lineman is huge. And so why not draft your potential Trent Williams successor now while you can? Moving on to the Panthers, this is after trading back with the Texans. I think they're gonna take, wide receiver, the Concepcion. I think that's how you say his name. Um, this might be kind of a risky pick, but I think the Panthers are gonna continue to surround Bryce Young with weapons and see how well Bryce Young does before offering Bryce Young a big contract. And now, if the Panthers do go wide receiver, it makes me kind of question how long is Xavier Legette going to be on the roster? Like, is he going to be the odd man out? Which a team, they might, during the season before the trade deadline, they might offer the Panthers, like, hey, I'll give you a fourth round pick for Xavier Legette, even though that Xavier Legette was a first round pick. So, moving on to pick 29, which, have going to the Dallas Cowboys, I think they're going to double up on an edge rusher. I think offensively they did fine. Defensively, they let up a lot of big plays. And I think they're going to try to, revive their pass rush to kind of be like what it was, a few years ago. And I think they're going to boost their front seven with this draft class before addressing their secondary in the future. Miami for pick 30. I believe they're going to draft DB Chris Johnson. I think Miami's going to try to address their secondary, and I think they're going to want to have a DB who's, like tall, fast, and just plays good coverage. Two picks left. We have the Patriots in Seattle. For the Patriots, I think they're going to take Denzel Boston. I think they're going to go wide receiver here. I think they're going to go wide receiver because of what happened with the whole Stephon Diggs situation. And right now, their wide receiver core is not looking very good. Like, if they do not address their wide receiving core, I do not think they're going to make it back. I don't think they're going to make as big of a run in the playoffs as they did, this past year. I don't think they will. And I think he could be a potential red zone threat. I mean, he's a big dude. He's 6'4", and yeah, he basically talked about like he can be a great red zone threat to any team that he goes to. And for the final pick in the first round, I have Seattle taking the other running back from Notre Dame, Jadarian Price. I think after losing Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, who knows when he's going to come back. I think if the Seattle Seahawks want to repeat as champions, I think they're going to need to address, the running back room because I think if their running back room, I think if they don't make an impact during games, I don't think they're going to go back to back as champions. But I think if that threat is there, I think they have a very good shot at going back to back, for being Super Bowl champions. Even though I want my Ravens or even the Chicago Bears to, get a Super Bowl in. But those are all my picks, predictions for the draft. I think there's going to be, there's always someone in the NFL draft that, like, the camera always is going to stay on them, but they don't get drafted in the first round. Um, so yeah, let me know what you all think in the comments down below. Let me know which of my predictions that you agree with. Let me know what you disagree with down below, and I will see you all in the next episode.